Yes, Elle will be talking to us about information architecture for documentation. Now, Elle runs her own business as a content strategist. She helps governments and large organisations improve their digital strategy and information architectures. She also offers training, and in fact today's talk is a small sliver of her 2-day information architecture workshop. If you want to know more, please do chat with her in the break, as she has courses coming up. Now, she started off life as a radio producer with the ABC, which has really focused her on narrative and storytelling in communications. She also loves science fiction, and has just started playing soccer, brackets football, again after a 25-year hiatus. She's also studying graphic design at TAFE because there's so much connection between visual hierarchy and narrative hierarchy. And she runs the Sydney Content Strategy Meetup and would like anyone in Sydney or anyone visiting Sydney around the time of the meetup to come along and attend. And she loves the letter E.
That was a bit of a cop-out, to be honest, because I was like, what letter do I love the best? They're all awesome. E is for Elle, that'll do. I actually do have a giant E in my lounge room, which is made out of lights, and it's actually quite fantastic, even though it is a bit narcissistic. Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. Thank you, Annette. This is my second Write the Docs. My first one was in Portland in Oregon. And one of the things I was really impressed about was their amazing, amazing venue. But I reckon this one is well and truly on par. It was just the venue in Portland, who's been there, who's seen it? Yeah, so it's like that quirky, fabulous music venue, but I love how quirky this one is as well. So I did my master's about 10 years ago in what they were calling information and knowledge management, but which was really just sexed up library science. And I tell you what, it was fantastic. I loved that. It was, can we talk about taxonomy and semantics a little bit more? Well, yes, we can. Fantastic. And in that class, I learned about, I guess, the psychology and the philosophy of information-seeking behaviour, which was really, really, I found fascinating. So when we're talking about information architecture, I'm well and truly in my happy place, and I'm so pleased to be sharing some of the things that I've learned over the last 2 years of teaching information architecture, but also 10 years or so of helping other people do it. So this is a bit of a no-shoot Sherlock moment, but product and documentation, in my mind, are 100% intertwined. And if you think about 3 scenarios, that there's a bit of a continuum there. So the first one might be the toaster that we talked about yesterday. With any luck, we can kind of use the toaster without too much documentation. The next scenario might be onboarding a new staff member in a team. And you might think there's more of a checklist there. What am I going to do? You know, in the olden days, you get them a telephone. We don't do that much these days, but I need to get them a pass and maybe access to the system. And then on the very other end of the spectrum, the continuum away from the toaster, is setting up the missions in Jira. We 100% need documentation for that challenge. Who's actually tried to do that? Okay, good luck to you. You will definitely need the documentation when you are doing that. So I'm just making that point in order to kind of build a kind of a story on that around information architecture. And I guess the qualification that I would also make is that documentation is part of content, and given that I'm a content strategist, I like to look at things a bit broadly. So what I'd like to do in this session is kind of get a bit of audience input, rather than me just kind of like doing this passive TV thing, talking to you. I would love to hear your questions, and I'm going to ask you a couple of questions as well. So, who's created an information architecture here? Just yell out. And what I'll do is you just bear with me. I will try and repeat some of the comments that you make so that everyone can hear and we keep a record of it. So, who's created an information architecture? Becky, you have. Yeah. What was it for?
Developer documentation site.
So, developer documentation site. Who else has created one? Yes. What was yours for?
Open source software.
Open source software. Okay, great. Okay.
Educational software too.
Educational software. So that's really interesting. So those 2 examples show us a bit of diversity between the potential ways that we can think about information architecture. So on one hand, we might be thinking about a sitemap in that classic sense of an IA for content on a website. We might also be thinking about information architecture on an individual page, that's the middle example, or we might be thinking about information architecture as it expressed to a UI. So those two examples are really nice to help us start thinking about what does information architecture actually mean. Who's got a definition of information architecture that they really like? No one? I heard someone say something, can you repeat it again, Natalie? No one knows what IA is. I know you do. I know it's going to be an awesome definition too. This is a friendly space. Thank you, Sarah.
So this is one I just made up on the
Yeah, love it.
Organising information so that people can find and read it.
Yeah, I love that. That's a beautiful definition. Organising information so people can find and consume it. Really great definition. And I think that's probably the definition that was running through your mind, even though you were thinking, oh, this is a trick question. I don't want to expose myself. It really is about literally organising information and potentially other assets. And in the context that we're talking about, we're thinking about a digital space. And of course, we know that information architecture is really, really important. We know that because people tell us that. We know when we think about having to redo our IA, it feels very stressful. And we know that there are lots of eyes on that IA piece of work. So it's like, oh, it must be super important. But I want to set the cat amongst the pigeons a little bit for you. So what would be an ideal journey for someone trying to find a solution to a problem, say in a piece of software that they're trying to fix? So for example, yesterday I was learning Git for the first time. Fantastic experience, thank you so much to our esteemed teacher. And I also had Michael helping me when things got a little bit wrong. Had some password thing going on, I had no idea what I was even meant to be searching for. He came and he helped me. Not everyone has Michael at home when you're having a software issue. So some of us use Google. So we've got a problem, right? We type in our problem, parsing the query in a way that makes sense to us. Some sort of weird, Git's asking me for some weird, like, I don't know, software sign-on password thing. That would be what would I type into Google? How effective that might be, I don't know. And then the ideal journey is that you would get the page and then you get on with your life. And you're like, woohoo, done. And then think, well, hang on a tick, you've just been banging on about IA. Where was the IA? Why is that not important in this journey, in this process? Yeah, I guess it is. And the way that I would say that the information architecture is important is in terms of these three mechanisms. One, it's about orientation. So you might use the information architecture expressed as navigation on your website to give you confidence that you are actually in the correct place. And you may also want to deepen or refine your search. So for example, you've come to approximately the right area you think, but you need to refine that search. Or you think, oh, this is definitely it, I've nailed it, but I need to get a bit more detail. And so that is why information architecture is so important, despite the fact that Google pathway being the ideal user pathway. So I just mentioned navigation there. It's really important for us to keep in our minds the distinction between information architecture and navigation. So IA is kind of the back-end structure, the taxonomy, if you like, the hierarchy, the expression of categorisation, which will include global header and global footer, as you know. Whereas the navigation is that visualisation of the IA. And it's just useful to understand that when you're using those words, what the distinction actually means. And I've used a mobile example there deliberately because those of you who have been designing IA for mobile will understand that there are some particular quirks there in terms of how IA is expressed in mobile navigation, which is really useful to understand. So, what is the actual work of crafting an information architecture? I reckon there's three pieces to it. The first one is the thing that you think is making IA, and it's actually creating the IA. It's figuring out what will my categories be, what will my hierarchies be. But in fact, when you think about delivering information architecture, there are three components. And the other really, really, really important one is figuring out how to sell your IA. Because I mean, as I mentioned before, I think we all know that information architecture is important, even though I've told you potentially in some scenarios it isn't. We know it is. Our bosses know it is, so there's scrutiny, there's eyes on, there's potential negative ramifications, perceived negative ramifications anyway, about getting IA wrong. So you really need to, when you are setting up an IA, you really need to be good at maintaining a system of being able to sell and articulate the decisions that you have been making really, really well. And I'll talk to you a little bit, very, very quickly, some strategies to do that sell. And of course, the third piece, which is so important, is the implementation. So as a content strategist, you go, what the hell do you do, Elle? I'm thinking, okay, well, one of the things situations I often find myself in is that I'm working with strategic designers who have developed archetypes or user flows for a website, for example. And it's really superb work, but when it actually comes to figuring out what's the translation between that work and actually doing something, i.e. creating some content or an artifact or a video or an infographic, there's a little bit of fuzziness between the strategy and the actual implementation. So as an information architect and as a content strategist, I'm super, super mindful about what is that connection. So when you're crafting IA, you're doing three things. You're actually crafting the sitemap, the spreadsheet, the thing that is going to represent the categorisation decisions that you're making, but you also need to be very mindful of how you're going to articulate, how you're going to sell, how you can convince, and then you're going to be thinking, actually, how is this going to be implemented? So those are three things to keep in mind. So say we were, okay, great, I'm sold, it's important, I'm going to do it. Where do you start? What do you need to craft really amazing information architecture? Well, the first thing you need, and we've talked about it this morning already, which is really fantastic, is you need to understand what users are trying to do. And when we're talking about documentation, we should have an understanding of what our users are trying to do. Can you yell out to me some inputs that you know that tell you what your users are trying to do?
Search bar.
Excellent, search bar, brilliant. So we're looking at the application and what people are typing into the search bar. Beautiful example, thank you. What else have we got? How else do you know what users are trying to do?
Support tickets.
Support tickets is a brilliant answer, I love that. Who was that? Yeah, nailed it, thank you. Nailed it. What else? How else do we know what our users are trying to do?
Questions on forums.
So there was two there, I think they were both brilliant. I want to hear both of them. What have we got?
Questions on forums.
Yes, excellent. Questions on forums. And?
Page navigation trails.
Oh yeah, nice one. Page navigation trails. And?
Talking to angry salespeople.
Yeah, beautiful. Lovely. And?
Social media.
Yeah, love it. Great work. And I might also add user research. So I would be, and there's a whole bunch of other ways. You can, so if you're looking at, if you're creating documentation for a software product, you can look at how people are actually engaging with the product. If you've got a cloud version where you understand what the user's doing, there may be some insight there as well. But you might also actually talk to users. Tracy was advocating that this morning, and I would reinforce that. It's quite a novel and fabulous way to find out what people are actually trying to do. You might also do a bit of a content audit. It's really amazing how many people don't actually know what their current state content set is. And I'm just talking at a high level here. I'm not talking about the content analysis, though that is an opportunity and that's something that you may like to do, but at a bare minimum, you should be understanding, what have I got in my documentation set? What form is it in? Who's it for? What does it say? How is it performing? And then you might want to get into the nitty-gritty of the content analysis. And analytics is a great way to find out whether or not it's performing. And something that we continually forget over and over again is, what are our business drivers? What is our product strategy, for example? What's our business strategy? What are the pieces that we're really wanting to focus on and hence might help us in terms of crafting a different information architecture or placing different emphasis on different content? Who here has access to their product strategy, knows where it is? Great, so that's probably not enough people. But well done to those who did raise their hand, excellent. That would be a great bit of homework for you to do when you get back to work on Monday. It's like, what exactly is our product strategy and how does my docs or my potential new IA align with that? So, these are your inputs. These are the things that if you collate these together, you're going to be in a pretty strong place to craft an information architecture that's going to work for your organisation, your product, your team. But what I want to do is give you a really quick overview of how I might build an information architecture. And in a way, I was thinking, should I do this or not? Because it's so kind of periphery. And really what you need to do is you actually need to practice to really come to terms with some of these concepts. And I still think it's worthwhile just to kind of go over it quickly. So when I am crafting an information architecture, these are the steps that I take. So first of all, and there should be a little bit of commonality to the last slide where I was talking about inputs. The first thing I'm looking at is what are my user tasks that I found out before as part of that user research. Like what specifically are people trying to do? And at this point, I might want to be segmenting, not segmenting in the dodgy marketing sense, let me be really clear, but just kind of understanding how different groups of people might be trying to complete different kinds of tasks. And again, this is something that your organisation fundamentally needs to have, irrespective of whether it's about documentation or content. This is a core product piece of analysis or insight. Then we do our audit, and again you can see a little bit of commonality with our inputs. So it might be that the audit's already done or the user tasks are already established, and if they're not, then you need to do them. You're the perfect person to do them. Because as, who was it who said just before that, that we, as tech writers, we're these beautiful conduits between all the different teams in the organisation. So the next piece is a card sort. It's funny, when I first started thinking about card sorts, I thought that they were complicated. Honestly, it's such an accessible, cheap, lightweight way to get some really great insights from your users, not your colleagues, your users, as to the kind of mental models or the way that they categorise information. I did a really interesting project for the Australian Securities and Investment Commission recently. They have a website called Money Smart, which is aimed at helping the 1 in 5 Australians who can't get access to $2,000 in an emergency help. And about 30% of all Australians have access to this website. It is the reach of the website is absolutely phenomenal, but they were constantly looking to improve it. And they were thinking, can you come and help us make sure this information architecture is correct? So in my mental model, superannuation, which we all need to do, a 9 or whatever 10% that we bosses take out of our package and we don't even realise it's happening, and investment were connected.
I was going to say, purchases.
Okay, sorry, stole your thunder.
Policy wonks.
Sorry about that. Right, so that's a conceptual model we really get, right? Then there might be user mindset. Again, this really is appropriate for us, right? We think, how might I adjust my documentation based on the expertise or exposure to my product of the end consumer of this content? So you think about Adobe, right? So Adobe has these products like Photoshop, which I'm trying to learn at the moment. And part of me gets it, and the other part is like the UI, it's like Git, everything's hidden. I have to know the instructions to actually figure it out, whereas I'm used to using applications where options are presented in the UI on the screen. With Photoshop, they're hidden behind these tiny little things, and you've got to know about it, dig in there. So we might be thinking, well, how might the documentation for Git for me be different from the documentation for an expert like Becky? So then ergonomic is another important one for us. So it's like, it makes total sense that we put chihuahuas and dachshunds and what's another dog? Oodles, thank you, together. But at what instance might we think, we would categorise something a little bit differently? You think about the vet that is in the bush, and they deal a lot with horses and cows and other bushy animals. And they may not be conceptually linked, but in terms of how frequently they come to that practice, that it makes total sense. And I imagine that there will be scenarios like that for you as well. And so troubleshooting, we talked a bit about whether that was an effective mechanism or not. I'm in the camp that says absolutely not. But if you decide to do that, that might be a form of ergonomic categorisation. What about strategic value? So for the organisation, your organisation might be thinking, oh, we have these particular things that we're trying to do, we might categorise content based on that, even though they may not make any kind of categorisation sense in other senses. Or desired behaviours, and these ones are kind of linked together. But if we're talking about a government agency, for example, you might be thinking, I'm trying to get people to do things, and we might slightly tweak the way our IA is structured in order to bubble up some of that content for those people. Of course, and time, this was Richard Saul-Warman mentioned time, but there might be ways that you can categorise your content based on time, and that might be temporally what's happening now, or it might be where people are going through. I thought the next one was process. Oh, still not. Oh, now I've stuffed it. I have to go back to the start. But another way of looking at it is looking at process. So geography makes sense, right? I categorise and it will be on a map, you know, content aligned by where it sits spatially. Now, alphabetical, all-time hated. I really, really want to see very clear justification for why you're using alphabetical. I know people are using the alphabet as a way to categorise stuff, and it seems to be working for them. But in terms of linking concepts that are connected, it is the most random and ridiculous way of connecting stuff together. So if you're going to use alphabetical, it has to be a second-tier option. So first of all, you connect stuff, like all the chihuahuas and the poodles are connected, and then underneath that, I might have some sort of like hair conditions or health conditions that are categorised alphabetically. Template types are exactly the same. My worst categorisation system, and you know what, people argue with me, and I totally get it. There are, and I'm sure, and I actually enjoy that conversation, and I want to learn more about where template types might be appropriate. But for the most part, people are not looking for a video or a form, they're looking for a solution to the problem that they currently have, which may be in the form of a video or a form. Of course, there are exceptions to that. An intranet might be an exception to that. You might have a particular type of learning, i.e. you really prefer to watch videos rather than look at a step-by-step kind of explanation. And again, you're probably going to look for the solution and then look for the learning mode second. And again, you might say, well, I've got evidence to contradict that, and I'd love to hear that at lunch, because I'm looking for good examples around that. So processes are the one for some reason I thought was coming after ergonomic. It's in the middle, but not at that point. So again, you can imagine, where are people in their process? Have they just downloaded the application? Are they trying to onboard new users? Are they trying to implement an advanced function? And probably what is most likely is you're going to be looking at a hybrid of the above. So you might have your first level of information architecture might be based around user group, and the second one might be based around product, for example. And that makes a lot of sense. I think there's a lot of pressure to be consistent, and yes, absolutely that pressure is appropriate. But like any rule, it's you need to figure out whether or not it's appropriate for you in a particular point in time. So no talk is complete without a nod to ethics. There are opportunities for you to be exclusive, to introduce deliberate or unintended dark patterns. So there are two references that I'd love you to look to guide you on that. So the first one is this book by Sarah Wachter called Technically Wrong. Highly recommended if anyone working in our industry. And the second one is these lenses that Dan Brown has created, these IA lenses, and I've actually got the pack with me today, and so again, if you want to have a look at them at lunch, come and say hello. And it talks about some really interesting ways that information architecture can bring in, again, these unintended consequences of potentially excluding or restricting information. Now, I mentioned that selling is super, super important, so I just want to go over really quickly some techniques. And you know what, the great thing about these techniques, and the reason I can do them quickly, is because you're already an absolute pro at this stuff, right? What's the first thing you do when you craft any piece of documentation? You understand your audience intimately. You know how to take people on a journey, both your internal stakeholders and your consumers of documentation. You absolutely are already making evidence-based decisions. That's how you know what you're doing is correct, and that's how you explain to other people how you know what you're doing is correct. This is one thing that you might not be doing so much, and that is like having those executive conversations or those senior stakeholder conversations, those product manager conversations about why what you're doing is the right thing, and that's certainly a muscle to develop. You already have some selling techniques, but it's definitely worth thinking about how you can enhance that. And I know you've already got this. It's this stamina of like, you know, constantly pushing forward and saying, yeah, I've got this is the right thing to do, we should do this. I know you want to like push out without release notes, or I know you want to push out without documentation, but actually we need to stop and get this thing right. And then if you're looking about the things that you want to or need to kind of create as an output of your IA practice, again, these are something that you'd be totally expecting. A sitemap, yes, we need that. We also need a spreadsheet, they need to be different. You need a migration plan. This goes to that third circle in the kind of create, sell and implement Venn diagram. You can't just make the IA without thinking how is it actually going to be implemented. You need to be able to explain very carefully why you made the decisions. Why did you make a process-based top-level choice over a categorisation one? You need a comm strategy. How are you going to roll this out and explain to your colleagues and other people about what it is you've done? And SEO strategy is really just saying, like, if you're going to break all these links with migrating stuff, then do you have a plan for handling how that might affect your organic search or people finding your content? So in summary, these are the ways to categorise your content. And I would highly recommend that when you're thinking about your information architecture, you really are clear about the ways you are categorising. These are the tools that I use to create information architecture. Again next week, if you're thinking, how do I start? The thing to do would be get a baseline of your current performance. Start running some tree jack tests on your current IA. And in order to do that, you really need to understand exactly what your current content set is. And just finally, if you want to learn more, I've written a blog around the categorisation of content categories. Well, that was a bit of tautology. I will share the slides. I didn't do it yet because we all know the best way to find mistakes in your slides is to show them to 100 people. That's when they pop up. I do training workshops. There's some next week in Canberra. If you're from Canberra, I'd love to see you. And as Lynette mentioned, I do run the Sydney Content Strategy Meetup, and I'd really love to have more tech writers there. I'd really love to invite you all personally to come to that on December 19th. We're just having drinks and a chat. Thanks so much, guys.
So we